The diplomatic chamber aboard the Velithron Concordance Station hummed with the familiar blue-white glow of artificial gravity fields. Ambassador Krenthis of the Hegemony watched the human delegation with growing unease, his crystalline fingers tapping against the obsidian conference table. The humans sat with an unsettling stillness, too controlled, too measured for a species supposedly relegated to the galaxy's agricultural caste. "Your proposal is generous," said the human representative, a woman named Octavia Vex. Her voice carried no tremor of gratitude that lesser species typically displayed when offered protection contracts, but unnecessary. Krenthis exchanged glances with Fleet Commander Yuvalan, whose 6 eyes narrowed behind his ceremonial mask. For 3 standard cycles, the Hegemony had catalogued humanity as a Tier 7 civilization, useful only for food production and manual labor. Their homeworld, designated as Terra Prime in Hegemony records, had been marked for protective oversight once their agricultural yields reached optimal efficiency. "Perhaps you misunderstand," Yuvalan's translator crackled with barely contained condescension. "The galaxy is dangerous for unprotected worlds. The Ravager clans, the Void Hunters, the Crimson Fleet, they prey upon the defenseless. We offer security in exchange for reasonable tribute." Octavia's companion, a man called Harker Dane, leaned forward slightly. The movement was subtle, but Krenthis noticed how every human in the room shifted their weight in perfect synchronization. "And if we decline?" The question hung in the recycled air like a blade waiting to fall. Krenthis felt his neck scales flutter, an involuntary response to perceived threat that he hadn't experienced since his military service decades ago. These humans radiated something that his predator instincts recognized, but his rational mind rejected. They were farmers, manufacturers, poets. The intelligence reports were clear. "Decline?" Yuvalan's laugh was a harsh, chittering sound. "Young species often struggle with reality. Let me clarify, this is not a negotiation. Your world produces 17% of Sector Delta's grain output. That productivity will continue under Hegemony supervision." The silence that followed felt different from diplomatic pauses. It pressed against Krenthis like the moment before a storm breaks. Octavia smiled, and her expression contained something that made his blood temperature drop. "Commander," she said softly, "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what humanity is." "Enlighten us," Yuvalan scoffed. "We're not farmers who learn to fight. We're fighters who learn to farm." Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Every seed we plant, every harvest we tend, every poem we write, it's all recovery. Rest between wars. You see our productivity and assume it defines us. But productivity is just what we do when we're not killing." Harker activated a small device on his wrist, and holographic displays materialized above the table. Krenthis stared at the data streaming past. Energy signatures, fleet positions, tactical assessments. The humans had been mapping every Hegemony military asset in the sector with surgical precision. "Your protection racket ends today," Octavia continued. "We've spent the last 6 months dismantling your operation world by world. The species you've been protecting are no longer interested in your services. They've found better security providers." "Impossible!" Yuvalan snarled, but his voice carried the first note of uncertainty Krenthis had ever heard from the arrogant fleet commander. The hologram shifted, showing real-time footage of Hegemony stations going dark across 3 systems, not destroyed, simply empty. Personnel evacuated, command structures dissolved, entire colonial administrations vanishing like morning mist. "The Ravager clans you mentioned?" Harker's voice held a thin smile. "They haven't been seen in this sector for 2 months. Coincidentally, that's when human agricultural consultants began visiting their hunting grounds." Krenthis finally understood why his instincts screamed warnings every time he looked at these creatures. Humans didn't just fight, they waged war like other species breathed. And they had been studying the Hegemony like specimens in a laboratory. fleet. Commander Yuvalin's composure cracked like ice under pressure. His ceremonial mask slipped as he lunged toward the emergency beacon, but Harker moved with fluid precision that defied his species' supposed limitations. The human's hand intercepted Yuvalin's wrist with surgical accuracy, applying just enough pressure to make the alien commander freeze. "Careful," Harker warned, his tone conversational despite the threat radiating from his stance. "We're still being diplomatic." The restraint in his voice was more terrifying than any show of force. Krenthis realized that humanity's agricultural facade had been maintained not from weakness, but from choice. They had allowed themselves to be categorized, studied, and underestimated while conducting their own far more sophisticated analysis. "You cannot threaten the hegemony aboard our own station," Yuvalin hissed, though his struggle against Harker's grip had ceased entirely. "This is sovereign territory." "Was," Octavia corrected gently. She gestured to the viewport where the void beyond should have shown the familiar pattern of hegemony patrol ships. Instead, sleek vessels with human markings held steady formations around the station. "Sovereignty requires the ability to enforce your claims." The human fleet materialized from stealth fields like predators emerging from tall grass. Each ship bore the aesthetic hallmarks of utilitarian design, but Krenthis's military experience recognized the subtle indicators of advanced combat systems. These weren't retrofitted agricultural haulers. They were purpose-built instruments of war disguised as civilian vessels. "How?" Krenthis whispered, his translator barely functioning through his shock. "Our intelligence networks, our surveillance systems detected exactly what we wanted them to detect," Octavia interrupted. "Humans excel at pattern recognition, Commander Krenthis. We studied your observation protocols for 18 months before making first contact. Every report your agents filed, every assessment your analysts made, we crafted those conclusions." New Human entered the chamber, moving with the same controlled grace that marked his species. Krenthis noted the absence of rank insignia or ceremonial decoration. This one introduced himself simply as Torex Vane, but his presence commanded immediate attention from the other humans. "The galactic community operates under some interesting assumptions," Torex began, settling into a chair with casual authority. "Peaceful species focus on art, science, and philosophy. Aggressive species build weapons and conquer territory. But what about a species that views warfare as the ultimate art form, where strategy and tactics are our poetry and victory is our greatest philosophical achievement?" He activated his own holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of the local galactic arm. Red markers indicated former hegemony territories, while blue signals represented worlds now under human protection. The transition had occurred with stunning efficiency across dozens of systems. "Your mistake was assuming that agriculture meant pacifism," Torex continued. "In reality, successful farming requires systematic thinking, resource management, long-term planning, and the ability to eliminate threats to your crops. These are precisely the skills that translate to military excellence." Yuvalin finally found his voice. "The Galactic Council will never accept human expansion. You're violating 17 different treaties. The Council is currently reviewing a formal proposal for humanity's elevation to Tier 2 status," Octavia interjected smoothly. "Surprisingly, they seem very interested in our conflict resolution services, especially after the Ravager problem was solved so efficiently." Krenthis felt reality shifting around him like quicksand. The Ravagers weren't eliminated, they were absorbed, recruited, Harker corrected. "Turns out that nomadic warrior clans respond well to superior leadership and better strategic objectives. The Crimson Fleet has also expressed interest in new management. The implications crashed over. Krenthis like a tidal wave? Humanity hadn't just dismantled the hegemony's protection racket. They had co-opted every military threat in the sector. The galaxy's most feared pirate fleets were now effectively human auxiliary forces. "What do you want?" he asked, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic superiority. Torex's smile held no warmth, but also no cruelty. We want the hegemony to survive this transition. Your administrative systems are efficient and your people show potential for adaptation. But the protection racket ends now. Every species in this sector will have the right to determine their own governance. And if they choose human protection over hegemony oversight, Yuvalon demanded, then they'll receive exactly what we promise, Octavia replied. Security, prosperity, and freedom from exploitation. We don't rule through fear or tribute extraction. We succeed by being genuinely better at the job. The awful truth settled over Krenthis like a burial shroud. Humanity had waged perfect war without firing a shot. They had neutralized every threat, co-opted every rival, and restructured galactic power dynamics while maintaining the facade of peaceful farmers. The hegemony hadn't lost a battle. They had been outmaneuvered so completely that resistance had become impossible before they even realized they were at war. 3 standard cycles had passed since the Velithrin negotiation, as historians would later call it, but Krenthis still woke from nightmares featuring Octavia Vex's predatory smile. The former hegemony systems had not collapsed as he'd expected. Instead, they had transformed with disturbing efficiency under human guidance. From his new office, technically still his old office, but with different flags outside, Krenthis reviewed productivity reports that defied everything he understood about post-conquest economics. Agricultural output had increased by 37%. Manufacturing efficiency had jumped by 42%. Most impossibly, civilian satisfaction indices had reached levels not seen since the early days of hegemony expansion. The humans are cheating somehow, muttered his assistant, a young hegemony analyst named Quill who had somehow retained his position despite the regime change. No species governs this effectively. Krenthis said nothing, but privately agreed. The transition had been too smooth, too comprehensive. Even now, most citizens of former hegemony worlds didn't realize they were living under human protection. The administrative structures remained largely intact, staffed by the same personnel following the same procedures. Yet somehow, everything worked better. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission. Torex Vane's image materialized above the communication array, his expression neutral, but his eyes holding that same calculating intelligence that had haunted Krenthis's dreams. "Commander," Torex said, using the human tendency to maintain previous titles and honors. "We have a situation developing in the outer terminus that requires your expertise." "My expertise?" Krenthis couldn't hide his surprise. "I'm a defeated enemy administrator. You're an experienced military strategist with intimate knowledge of galactic political structures," Torex corrected. "The situation requires both qualities." The holographic display shifted to show the outer terminus, a region beyond hegemony space that had always been considered too dangerous for colonization. Massive energy signatures pulsed across the tactical overview, indicating the presence of something far more threatening than pirates or raiders. "The Nethys Empire has decided to investigate humanity's rapid expansion," Torex explained with clinical detachment. "They've assembled a war fleet containing approximately 4,000 combat vessels, supported by planetary siege engines and genetic warfare capabilities." Krenthis felt his scales flatten against his neck, an involuntary fear response. The Nethys Empire existed in galactic mythology as much as recorded history, an ancient civilization that had purged entire sectors of inhabited worlds before retreating into deep space millennia ago. If they had truly emerged from their mysterious exile. "You need to evacuate every human settlement immediately," Krenthis said urgently. "The Nethys don't negotiate, don't take prisoners, and don't leave survivors. They view younger species as contamination to be sterilized." "Evacuation isn't our preferred strategy," Torex replied calmly. "We're more interested in understanding their capabilities before committing to a specific response." The casual tone made Krenthis's blood freeze. "You cannot fight the Nethys Empire. They conquered half the galaxy before your species developed agriculture. Their ships channel raw stellar energy. Their weapons disintegrate matter at the molecular level, and their commanders have been waging war since before your planet developed complex life. All excellent intelligence, Torex acknowledged, which is why we're requesting your assistance in developing countermeasures. I don't have countermeasures. Krenthis' voice rose to near panic levels. No one has countermeasures. The only reason any of us exist is because the Nethys withdrew voluntarily. If they've decided to resume expansion, entire civilizations will simply end. Torex's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture that reminded Krenthis of a hunting cat preparing to pounce. Commander, you're thinking like prey. We need you to think like a predator. The words hit Krenthis like a physical blow. He realized that humanity had been hiding more than their agricultural facade. They had been concealing the depth of their predatory instincts, their fundamental understanding of warfare as natural law rather than unfortunate necessity. The Nethys Empire conquered through overwhelming technological superiority, Torex continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of a military briefing. They never faced opponents who could match their strategic thinking or adapt faster than their advantages could be deployed. They've been fighting the same war for millions of years. While we, Krenthis whispered, beginning to understand the horrifying implications, have been evolving. Precisely. Torex's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. The Nethys expect to face primitive species using crude weapons and predictable tactics. Instead, they're going to encounter predators who've been studying warfare as an art form for their entire evolutionary history. The holographic display zoomed in on the approaching Nethys fleet. Even at maximum magnification, the alien vessels appeared more like mobile space habitats than traditional warships. Each one could likely destroy entire star systems, but they moved with the ponderous confidence of apex predators who had never encountered effective resistance. What do you need from me? Krenthis asked, though part of his mind was already racing through tactical possibilities he had never dared consider. Help us understand how gods might think, Torex replied, because we're about to teach them how mortals can hunt. The war room aboard the human command vessel Inexorable Purpose resembled nothing Krenthis had ever seen in his military career. Instead of traditional tactical displays and communication arrays, the space buzzed with organic energy, human officers, moving in synchronized patterns that suggested both choreographed dance and predatory pack behavior. At the center of it all stood Fleet Admiral Cypher Holt, a woman whose presence dominated the chamber, despite her unremarkable physical appearance. She studied the approaching Nethys armada with the focused intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Preliminary analysis confirms your historical assessments, she said to Krenthis, without turning from the displays. Nethys combat doctrine hasn't evolved significantly in approximately 2 million years. They rely on overwhelming technological advantage supported by predictable tactical frameworks. That's because it always worked, Krenthis replied, studying the sensor readings that showed impossible energy signatures emanating from the alien fleet. No species has ever developed effective countermeasures against stellar core weaponry or molecular disintegration fields. No previous species had our advantages, Admiral Holt corrected. She gestured to a wall display showing human ships scattered throughout the system in what appeared to be complete disorder. The Nethys conquered through force projection, visible demonstrations of superior power that induced psychological surrender before actual combat became necessary. Krenthis examined the human fleet disposition more carefully. What he had initially perceived as chaos gradually revealed itself as something far more sophisticated. The ships weren't randomly positioned. They were creating a three-dimensional web that would channel the Nethys advance into predetermined corridors while maintaining multiple fallback positions. They're not going to surrender to superior technology, he realized aloud. You're going to make them fight for every meter of space. More than that, said a voice from behind him. Torex Vane emerged from a side passage, carrying data tablets covered in symbols that hurt Krenthus's eyes to look at directly. "We're going to make them discover that their technological superiority has become a weakness." The main display shifted to show detailed scans of individual Nethys vessels. Each ship was a masterwork of engineering that could serve as a mobile research station, manufacturing center, and weapons platform simultaneously. They represented the pinnacle of ancient science, refined across millions of years of absolute dominance. "The problem with perfection," Admiral Holt explained, "is that it becomes predictable. These ships have optimal performance parameters that can't be exceeded without fundamental redesign. Their weapon systems have maximum effective ranges based on physical constants. Their defensive capabilities follow logical limitations imposed by energy distribution requirements. They're gods of war operating within natural laws," Torex added. "But we're predators who learn to bend those laws without breaking them." Krenthus watched as human ships began implementing maneuvers that violated every principle of space combat he had ever learned. Vessels accelerated past theoretical safety limits, executed turns that should have liquefied their crews, and coordinated attacks across distances that made real-time communication impossible. "How?" he whispered. "We didn't evolve for space combat," Admiral Holt replied. "We evolved for persistence hunting on a world where prey could outrun us, outfight us, and outlast us individually. So we learned to hunt in coordinated groups across impossible distances, to track quarry for days or weeks, and to exploit every weakness until exhaustion made our prey vulnerable." The Nethys fleet was entering the outer system now, their passage marked by casual demonstrations of power that turned asteroids into expanding clouds of plasma. Krenthus could feel the ancient terror that these beings had once inspired across the galaxy, the knowledge that resistance was futile against such overwhelming force. But the humans weren't fleeing. Instead, they were closing distance in patterns that made no tactical sense according to conventional doctrine. Small groups of ships darted between the massive Nethys vessels like pack hunters harassing a herd, never engaging directly but forcing constant course corrections and energy expenditures. "The Nethys expect decisive battle," Torex observed, monitoring communication intercepts from the alien fleet. "They're broadcasting surrender demands and preparing for demonstration strikes against planetary targets." "Let them waste energy on empty worlds," Admiral Holt replied coldly. "Every shot they fire at nothing is energy they won't have for us." The strategy was becoming clear to Krenthus. Humanity wasn't trying to match Nethys' firepower or technology. Instead, they were implementing the same persistence hunting tactics that had made them apex predators on their homeworld. Exhaust the prey through constant harassment, force energy expenditure through false targets, and exploit growing fatigue until victory became inevitable. "This is insane," he muttered, but found himself unable to look away from the tactical display. "You're hunting gods." "No," Admiral Holt corrected with a smile that would have made sharks nervous. "We're teaching gods what it feels like to be prey." The first phase of contact was about to begin, and Krenthus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, not just a battle between species, but a collision between two fundamentally different concepts of warfare itself. The Nethys flagship world ender cut through space like a moving constellation, its hull composed of crystallized stellar matter that pulsed with the heartbeat of captured stars. Fleet Sovereign RKX had commanded this vessel for longer than most civilizations had existed, witnessing the rise and fall of countless species across the galactic arm. Yet something felt different about this campaign. The humans had not fled. At the sight of Nethys' power, had not broadcasted desperate surrender offers, had not even attempted diplomatic contact. Instead, they simply watched. "Energy signatures are inconsistent with our projections," reported his tactical coordinator, a being whose consciousness had been encoded in quantum matrices millennia ago. "Human vessels are operating beyond theoretical performance limits." RKX, dismissed the report with a gesture that rippled through local space-time. Younger species often pushed their technology past safety margins when faced with extinction. It would only hasten their defeat when their ships inevitably suffered catastrophic failures. "Commence demonstration strikes," he ordered. "Target their largest settlements and industrial centers. Once they witness the futility of resistance, we can proceed with standard purification protocols." The massive weapons arrays of the Nethys fleet aligned with practiced precision, channeling the output of entire stars into focused beams of annihilation. The first salvo lanced out toward the human colony world of New Meridian, carrying enough energy to crack continents and boil oceans. The beams struck empty space. "Recalibrate targeting systems," RKX commanded, though a small anomaly in his ancient consciousness began registering something approaching surprise. "These coordinates were confirmed by our scouts. Targeting systems are functioning correctly," his coordinator replied. "The planet is no longer in that location." RKX accessed the tactical display directly, his awareness expanding to encompass the entire star system. New Meridian hung in space exactly where it should be, but somehow the devastation beams had missed by thousands of kilometers. The energy had dissipated harmlessly into the void, leaving the world untouched. "Impossible," he breathed, though the word felt strange after millions of years of absolute certainty. Planets do not move. But even as he spoke, sensor readings confirmed the impossible. New Meridian was indeed in motion, following a trajectory that had taken it precisely out of the weapon's path at the moment of firing. The massive gravitational engines required for such a feat should have torn the world apart, yet the planet showed no signs of tectonic stress or atmospheric disruption. "Fleet Sovereign," another voice interrupted his analysis. "We're detecting anomalous movement patterns among human vessels. They appear to be implementing some form of coordinated evasion protocol." The tactical display zoomed out to show the broader engagement area. Human ships throughout the system were moving in synchronized patterns that defied comprehension. They accelerated past theoretical limits, executed turns that should have been physically impossible, and maintained perfect formation coordination across vast distances where light-speed communication created unavoidable delays. "They're not following individual flight paths," RKX realized with growing unease. "They're moving as a single organism." The implications struck him like a physical blow. In all his eons of conquest, the Nethys had faced individual ships, individual planets, individual civilizations. Each component could be isolated, targeted, and destroyed separately until the whole collapsed. But humanity appeared to function as a gestalt entity where every ship, every world, every person operated as part of a larger coordinated intelligence. "Begin saturation bombardment," he ordered. "If they can move individual targets, we'll eliminate all possible positions simultaneously." The Nethys fleet opened fire with the fury of 1,000 suns, filling entire cubic light seconds with overlapping destruction fields. No conventional defense could survive such overwhelming firepower. No evasion system could predict and avoid such comprehensive coverage. Yet somehow, the humans did. Ships flickered between dimensions, phasing out of existence microseconds before annihilation beams reached their positions. Planets slipped sideways through folded space, emerging unharmed in different orbital configurations. Entire star systems seemed to reshape themselves around the weapons fire, guiding destruction into carefully prepared void zones where the energy dissipated harmlessly. "How are they doing this?" RKX demanded, his ancient composure cracking for the first time in geological ages. The answer came not from his crew, but from an open transmission broadcast on all frequencies by the human fleet. Admiral Holt's image appeared on every Nethys display, her expression calm, but her eyes holding depths of predatory intelligence that made even immortal beings feel small. "Fleet Sovereign RKX," she said, somehow knowing exactly who would be listening. "Welcome to persistence hunting on a galactic scale. Your species mastered the art of overwhelming force. We mastered the art of being impossible to catch. The transmission continued as human ships began implementing maneuvers that violated every assumption about space combat that the Nethys had developed over millions of years. You've been fighting the same war for eons, massive ships, massive weapons, massive displays of power that force immediate surrender. But we evolved hunting prey that was faster, stronger, and more dangerous than us individually. We learned patience. RKX felt something he had not experienced since the dawn of his consciousness. The cold touch of genuine uncertainty. The humans weren't trying to match Nethys' power. They were using the Nethys' own strength against them, turning every overwhelming advantage into a liability that could be exploited. You wanted to fight gods. Admiral Holt's voice carried across the void with quiet confidence. Congratulations. You found us. 12 standard hours into what should have been a swift purification campaign, Fleet Sovereign RKX experienced something that millions of years of existence had not prepared him for. Genuine exhaustion. The Nethys fleet had expended more energy in half a day than in the previous century of conquest, yet had failed to inflict meaningful damage on a single human target. Status report, he commanded, though his ancient consciousness already processed, the data flowing through the fleet's quantum communication network. Weapons systems operating at 67% efficiency, reported his tactical coordinator. Prolonged maximum output firing has stressed crystalline matrices beyond optimal parameters. Stellar core reservoirs have dropped to 82% capacity. The numbers should have been impossible. Nethys vessels were designed to channel the power of entire stars indefinitely. Their weapons could maintain sustained fire for centuries without significant degradation. Yet somehow, the humans had forced them to exhaust resources that should have been practically unlimited. They're not fighting us, RKX realized, his perspective expanding to encompass the broader tactical situation. They're making us fight ourselves. The human fleet continued its impossible dance through space, every ship moving in perfect coordination, despite operating across distances where real-time communication was physically impossible. They appeared when Nethys weapons were recharging, vanished when targeting systems achieved lock, and materialized in unexpected positions that forced constant recalibration of fire control matrices. "It's like hunting smoke," muttered the fleet's combat coordinator, an entity whose consciousness had been forged in the crucible of 1,000 galactic wars. "Every time we achieve target acquisition, they flow around our weapons like they're not even there." But RKX was beginning to understand the deeper horror of humanity's strategy. The humans weren't just evading destruction. They were learning from every exchange. Each weapon fired, each targeting protocol implemented, each tactical decision made by the Nethys fleet was being analyzed, cataloged, and integrated into an ever-evolving response matrix. "They're studying us," he said aloud, the words carrying implications that chilled even his immortal essence. "Every second of this engagement, they're becoming more efficient at predicting our behavior. A new transmission cut across all communication channels, this time originating from multiple human sources simultaneously." Torex Vane's image appeared alongside dozens of other humans, each speaking in perfect synchronization as if they were components of a single vast mind. "Fleet Sovereign," the collective voice began, "you've been maintaining the same tactical doctrines for approximately 2.3 million years. We've had 12 hours to analyze your patterns, predict your responses, and develop countermeasures. The asymmetry is becoming problematic." The words were delivered with clinical detachment, but RKX detected something underneath the professional tone. Not cruelty or hatred, but the focused intensity of apex predators that had identified prey and were methodically wearing it down. "Your vessels are magnificent," the humans continued. "Each one represents pinnacle engineering that our species might achieve in a few thousand years of development. But magnificence follows rules, and rules create patterns, and patterns can be exploited by sufficiently persistent hunters. As if, to demonstrate their point, human ships began implementing maneuvers that seemed designed specifically to waste Nethys ammunition. They appeared in positions that demanded massive energy expenditure to target, then vanished microseconds before. Weapons could fire, leaving the shots to dissipate harmlessly into space. "We studied your historical campaigns," the collective voice explained as Nethys energy reserves continued their steady decline. "The Zarion Empire lasted 4 minutes against your initial assault. The Valorian Federation managed 11 minutes before surrendering. The record holder, the Ascendant Coalition, held out for 37 minutes before their civilization was sterilized." RKX felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vacuum of space. The humans had researched every major Nethys campaign, analyzed every victory, and identified the common factors that had made ancient conquest so devastatingly efficient. "The pattern is consistent," the humans continued. "Overwhelming demonstration of power, followed by immediate collapse of enemy resistance. Your entire strategic framework depends on psychological capitulation before extended combat becomes necessary. But we're not going to capitulate." The truth struck RKX like a collision with a collapsing star. The Nethys Empire had become so accustomed to swift victory that they had never developed protocols for prolonged engagement. Their ships were built for devastating alpha strikes, not sustained warfare. Their tactics assumed rapid domination, not extended resistance. "You made yourselves into perfect predators," the human collective observed. But perfect predators in environments without significant resistance often lose the ability to adapt when they encounter new challenges. "You've been gods for so long that you've forgotten how to learn." Human ships began closing distance now, not to engage in direct combat, but to force the Nethys fleet into increasingly costly evasive maneuvers. Every movement required energy expenditure. Every course correction stressed systems designed for overwhelming force rather than tactical flexibility. We, on the other hand, the humans concluded, evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill us. We learned adaptation as a survival mechanism, and we've been adapting to you for the last 12 hours. RKX finally understood the magnitude of his error. The Nethys Empire had encountered something unprecedented in their millions of years of expansion, a species that viewed warfare not as conquest or domination, but as evolution in real time. The end came not with apocalyptic destruction, but with the quiet efficiency of a predator that had finally cornered its exhausted prey. Fleet Sovereign RKX watched his energy reserves drop below critical thresholds while human ships maintained their relentless harassment campaign. Each maneuver, perfectly calculated to force maximum resource expenditure from the Nethys fleet. 18 hours. No Nethys campaign in recorded history had lasted 18 hours. Yet here they were, their supposedly unlimited power reserves drained to dangerous levels. Their perfect weapon systems overheated and cycling down for emergency maintenance. Their invincible fleet reduced to desperate defensive maneuvers. "Stellar core reservoirs at 23%, reported his tactical coordinator, the quantum entity's voice carrying harmonics of something approaching panic. "If we continue current engagement protocols, we'll reach minimum operational thresholds within 4 standard hours." "Then we don't continue current protocols," RKX decided, his ancient mind finally accepting what should have been impossible. The Nethys Empire was losing a war. "Signal fleet-wide withdrawal. We return to deep space and reassess." But even as he gave the order, RKX knew it was too late. The human ships weren't just harassing his fleet, they were herding it, using the same tactics that Earth's apex predators had once employed to drive prey animals over cliffs or into killing grounds. Every Nethys vessel that attempted to break away from the engagement found its path blocked by perfectly positioned human squadrons. "Withdrawal routes are compromised," his navigator reported with the disbelief of a being that had never experienced tactical encirclement. "Human forces have anticipated every exit vector from the system." Admiral Holt's image materialized on The command display one final time, her expression holding the calm satisfaction of a hunter whose prey had finally stopped running. Fleet Sovereign RKX, you've fought well, but this engagement is over. Your fleet is surrounded, your energy, reserves are critically depleted, and your tactical options have been eliminated through systematic attrition. The words should have been impossible to accept, but the tactical display confirmed their accuracy. Nethys vessels hung in space like exhausted leviathans, their once fearsome weapons arrays dim and cooling, their crews struggling to maintain basic life support systems after nearly 20 hours of sustained combat operations. "What are your terms?" RKX asked, the question tasting like poison in his ancient consciousness. No Nethys commander had ever spoken those words. They were, "The conquerors, not the conquered." "Unconditional surrender," Admiral Holt replied without hesitation. "Your fleet will stand down all weapon systems and submit to human boarding parties. Your personnel will be processed according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war. Your technology will be studied to determine what can be integrated into our collective defense capabilities. And our empire?" RKX found himself asking, though he already suspected the answer. "Will adapt or be replaced," Torex Vane said, joining the transmission. "The age of conquest through overwhelming force is ending, Fleet Sovereign. Humanity represents the next phase of galactic evolution, cooperation through superior capability rather than domination through superior firepower." The holographic display shifted to show the broader galactic situation. Across dozens of star systems, Nethys outposts and colonies were being approached by human diplomatic vessels. Not invaded, not destroyed, but offered the same choice that RKX now faced: adaptation or irrelevance. "Your species ruled through fear for millions of years," Admiral Holt continued. "But fear-based authority only functions until someone demonstrates that the source of fear can be defeated. Today, we prove that gods can be outmaneuvered by mortals, who refuse to accept the limitations that gods assume are absolute." Krenthis, who had remained silent throughout the final phase of the engagement, finally spoke from his position aboard the human command vessel. "Fleet Sovereign, I've spent the last day watching humanity wage war against the most powerful civilization in galactic history. They didn't defeat you through superior technology or greater numbers. They defeated you by being fundamentally better at warfare itself." The former hegemony commander's words carried the weight of professional military assessment. "Your people mastered the tools of war. Humans mastered war as a concept. They understand it as an evolutionary process rather than a competition of resources. Every second of this engagement, they became more efficient at fighting you specifically, while you remained locked into patterns that worked against every previous opponent but couldn't adapt to their unique capabilities." RKX felt the weight of millions of years of certainty crumbling around his consciousness. The Nethys Empire had ruled the galaxy so long that they had forgotten the fundamental truth that had once made them apex predators. Evolution never stops. "We accept your terms," he said finally, the words echoing across quantum communication networks to every Nethys vessel in the fleet. Ancient weapons systems powered down with harmonics that sounded almost like sighs of relief. "But understand that this surrender comes with a request." Admiral Holt's expression remained neutral, but her posture suggested willingness to listen. "Teach us," RKX continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine humility that his species hadn't experienced in geological ages. "We have ruled through stagnation, maintaining power by refusing to change. You have conquered through constant adaptation, growing stronger with every challenge faced. If the age of static dominance is truly ending, then we would learn to survive in whatever comes next." The silence that followed stretched across light seconds, filled with the quiet hum of human ships maintaining their perfect formations around the defeated Nethys fleet. When Admiral Holt finally responded, her words carried unexpected warmth. "Fleet, Sovereign, the greatest predators are those that can learn from their prey. Your people survived as galactic apex species for millions of years. That represents evolutionary success on a scale that humanity has never achieved. We can learn from each other. Torex Vane's image joined the conversation, his expression, holding the same calculating intelligence that had haunted Krenthus's nightmares, but tempered now with something approaching respect. The universe is vast enough for multiple apex species, provided they can coexist without one attempting to dominate the others. Cooperation between immortal gods and adaptive predators might produce something unprecedented. 6 months later, Krenthus stood in what had once been the hegemony's primary strategic planning center, now serving as a joint command facility for the rapidly evolving Galactic Defense Network. Through the viewports, he could see vessels from dozens of species working in coordinated patterns that would have been impossible under the old systems of conquest and tribute. Nethys dreadnoughts moved alongside human carriers, their ancient technology integrated with adaptive tactical systems that learned and evolved with each simulation. Former hegemony administrative vessels served as mobile coordination centers, their efficient bureaucratic systems now managing resource distribution for a cooperative network that spanned hundreds of worlds. Status report, Admiral Holt requested, her presence commanding immediate attention despite the casual tone. Integration proceeds ahead of schedule, Krenthus replied, consulting data streams that showed productivity and satisfaction indices climbing steadily across all participating civilizations. The Ravager clans have successfully transitioned from raiding to patrol duties. Nethys Engineering Corps are developing defensive technologies that adapt in real time to new threats. Even the most resistant former hegemony administrators are beginning to understand the advantages of cooperative efficiency over extraction-based economics. Fleet Sovereign Archaex materialized as a holographic presence, his ancient consciousness now housed in quantum communication systems that allowed him to coordinate with human tactical networks. The integration had been challenging, immortal. Beings weren't naturally suited to rapid adaptation, but the results were proving revolutionary. Long-range sensors detect anomalous energy signatures approaching from the galactic core, he reported with the precision of eternal experience. The patterns are consistent with deep space civilizations that have been dormant for approximately 10 million years. If they are awakening now, it suggests they've detected the recent changes in galactic power structures. More gods coming to investigate the new management? Torex Vane asked with dry humor, though his tactical instincts were clearly engaged. Unknown, Archaex admitted. But the energy signatures are significantly more advanced than Nethys technology at its peak. If these beings represent the next tier of galactic evolution, even our combined capabilities may prove insufficient. Admiral Holt studied the sensor readings with the focused intensity that had made humanity the galaxy's most effective predators. Then we adapt again. That's what predators do when they encounter superior prey. They evolve to match the challenge. She turned to address the assembled representatives of dozens of species, each one a former enemy or rival that had been integrated into humanity's expanding network of cooperative defense. Ladies, gentlemen, and immortal consciousnesses, it appears we're about to face our first examination as a unified galactic civilization. Whatever's coming from the core represents power levels that none of us could handle individually. But individually was never how humans approached impossible challenges. Krenthus felt a familiar chill run down his spine, but this time it carried anticipation rather than fear. He had watched humanity transform galactic warfare from conquest-based domination to evolution-based cooperation. If ancient powers were stirring in response to these changes, they would discover that gods, mortals, and everything in between had learned to hunt together. Begin fleet-wide integration protocols, Admiral Holt commanded. If we're about to meet our predecessors, let's make sure they understand that evolution hasn't stopped with them either. The viewports filled with the sight of impossible coordination as hundreds of vessels from dozens of species moved in perfect synchronization. each one contributing unique capabilities to a gestalt intelligence that exceeded the sum of its parts. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had taught it to conquer itself, transforming every former enemy into a component of something greater. As the mysterious signals from the galactic core grew stronger, Krenthis realized that he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in cosmic history, a civilization that grew stronger through diversity rather than uniformity, that conquered through cooperation rather than domination, and that faced the unknown with the absolute confidence of apex predators who had learned that adaptation was the ultimate weapon. The grim reality that aliens had discovered was now spreading. Throughout the galaxy like wildfire, humanity hadn't just been built for combat, they had been built to transform combat itself into evolution. And evolution, as every species was learning, never stopped moving forward.